Hey everyone, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of NoDon'tDie.com. Here I'm bringing you the second half of my Q&A with Brandon Sheffield, who's a writer and a video game producer. He and I spoke on September 8th, 2016. If you'd like to read transcripts of other interviews I've done for this project, you can hop on over to NoDon'tDie.com. There and on the YouTube, you'll see a link to my Patreon where your support helps me continue my work on this project. Thanks for listening and reading, and now, here's Brandon Sheffield.
Yeah, no, I mean, in my own experience, like with this site, it's the same thing. I knew HTML, and then when cascading style sheets came out, I didn't keep up. So I mean, I have a web developer on this thing, but I know better than to than to get impatient with him. I send him ideas and know that we'll implement it when we can get to it, because every idea that you have can open up a whole other subset of other ideas that may indirectly take you to the thing you thought you wanted to do, but you may wind up getting the thing you wanted and learning you didn't want it in the first place.
Yeah, that's what.
But I'm not.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that, I mean, I don't know why it's at such a critical mass in, pockets of the game audience, where it's one thing to have that thought, but then it's another to like write that down, where it's like, oh, it would have been so easy to put this in that game. Why didn't you do that? Why are you a liar?
Yeah, well, it's because ideas are cheap, and you can have them and you can write them down and be like, seems easy to me. A whole bunch of other people put multiplayer in their games, so obviously this team made a good-looking video game. How could they be so incompetent that they can't just slap some multiplayer in there? Well, like hit the multiplayer button.
Just tighten those graphics.
Yeah.
But I mean, your trajectory, it's not unusual, and I've heard this before. People who have gone from writing about games to start making them. It sounds like it becomes incredibly illuminating. I mean, what do you sort of wish from that vantage point, that there were more stories about, or there were things to sort of make the audience realize things they didn't know? I know you said you tried to leave Gamasutra, and that's sort of one good place that's much more, it's probably more industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, developer focused. I think you just published a thing even as recently as this last night.
Yeah.
Or this morning.
Well, it was last night, but then it got featured this morning. So.
Okay. Yeah. Which weirdly echoed a conversation I had yesterday morning with someone else about, there was a thing about publishers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Coincidentally, but I mean, are there things you wish places like Gamasutra did a better job of that are industry focused? Are there things you wish just media in general did a better job of that interfaces with the public, or like what do you feel is lacking in the media landscape?
Yeah, I think we can all do better on all fronts there, of course, but I think it's really hard to get people to understand what it takes to make a video game without teaching them how to make a video game. And you can't teach every person how to make a video game in every article. Telling somebody why it's complicated to do multiplayer requires a knowledge base that person's not going to have. And so I don't really know exactly how you solve that problem. It's a difficult one. I think, I like when sites like Gamasutra have cool articles about new techniques and different kinds of lighting and rendering and these very specific things. But those articles they have a huge high barrier of entry. You have to know a bunch of what you're talking about first, and then you can learn this advanced technique. And basic stuff is kind of difficult to make interesting, because if you're learning, you can pretty much Google everything. Ultimately, like there are better ways to set you down the path to learning, but every obstacle you run into is pretty much Googleable at this point. not everything, but a lot of it. So ultimately, you have to make somebody want to understand. Maybe, though, the problem is not that you need to teach people to code, but you need to teach people empathy. And that's a really tough one, because that kid who's writing about how easy it is to do multiplayer, they probably have things in their life, like maybe they're a college student and they're about to fail their exams, and that's really hard for them, and that's difficult for them to explain to their parents why they're failing this thing and why it isn't working for them. But empathy is lacking. It's lacking.
That's sort of one of the cornerstones of this thing that I'm doing. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but it's sort of like I'm trying to make a good effort to help humanize this stuff and focus less on games as products and talk more about just sort of the people behind them. But
it's
go ahead.
It's hard to make people care about anything other than themselves. But
it's true of anything.
It's true of anything. It's not just about games, of course. But I had an interesting sort of accidental case study in this, where I released 2 trailers. One in February of last year, which was, I think, maybe I don't have the date right, but it was a Gunsport trailer. And it wasn't a great trailer, I now realize. It kind of didn't do what I really wanted it to do. But the backlash against that trailer was intense, because it got featured on the Sony and Xbox YouTube channels and blogs, and tweeted out by them as a new game that was coming to PS4 and Xbox. And this was during a time when people were really upset, like, where are my AAA games, Sony and Microsoft? Why are you funding this tiny piece of crap? Which, of course, they weren't funding it. But, from their perspective, it's like, how could you allow this game that looks like it has Atari graphics on this powerhouse that I paid $500 for? And so we had like way more dislikes than likes, and it just, people hated the fact that we existed, because we put this pixel art kind of simple game out there for them to look at. They didn't have to buy it even, but it felt like a waste of their time that it existed. But then, a few months later, we put out a trailer for Oh Dear Alpha, which was our PlayStation mobile game that was only available for 1 month, and the reaction was super different, because we had done before we put out the trailer, we had talked to Birdie at Eurogamer about the development of the game and how we knew it wasn't going to make money, but we wanted to put it out anyway because we had been working on this thing. We just wanted some people to be able to play it on their Vita. And he wrote this thing that was very nice about that. And so then when the trailer came out, people were like, you guys have worked so hard. It's great to see that you're putting this thing out. Like, the narrative had been completely changed and almost constructed to be that we were the underdogs and we were scrappy upstarts trying our best. But with the other game, which was similar in graphic style, because it had been promoted by the big guys, and then it was like, what's the deal with this garbage? But when we were put forth as scrappy indies who just want to make their game, people were so much more understanding. And so you can sort of, you like, do you have to force empathy out of people? Maybe, but it's interesting that it can sort of be proffered up in that way. People were definitely more empathetic toward us when it seemed like we were doomed to failure than when it seemed like we were getting promoted by the big guns and weren't worthy of it.
I mean, it's funny. I think what I'm hearing from you is a interesting point, which is that I think a lot of it's like a lot of writing about games is sort of an uphill battle, and a lot of it is I mean, it's an uphill battle as far as just like point of entry and just sort of the assumptions that are being made about the people who are reading it. I mean, I wonder if there's like some assumptions or some points of entry that are not being acknowledged. I mean, you talked a little bit about sort of the strange assumptions that writers make about, like when they're playing a game, they're writing about it and they assume that it was the intention of the developer and not a crazy accident, which you said is usually what most of game development is.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I already asked you, what you feel is missing, but I mean, do you feel like maybe there are assumptions that writing about games is not addressing, or are there points of entry that are being ignored? Like, the thing I always wonder about is there's a short list of games that I think people know who are in the know to rattle off as examples of really interesting, cool, progressive, amazing, creative stuff in video games. But how are people who, not in the know supposed to hear about that stuff? That's something that I always wonder about, and I don't know if you have an answer, but I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't know how you do it now, but that was the whole point of Insert Credit, was to talk about things that people aren't talking about, but curate it in an interesting way. I mean, I scoured the internet constantly trying to find cool links for people in 2002.
It should be said too, yeah, for people reading this, this is back in a time when, you could sort of reasonably, not completely drown trying to do that. Like, my memory is going on NeoGAF in 2005, and you could, I mean, it hadn't exploded in quite the same way that it has in the last 11 years since then.
There weren't as many games coming out.
Right.
But also there were a few websites that were in Japanese that I could reliably go to and scan for something interesting and then translate that. And I did a lot of that. Now, I think you've got to have good writing in a different angle, and then you can still illuminate things. But I don't know how a writer gets started these days, because it's just, how do you get noticed? Just being good isn't enough. But so few people do that that maybe it would be enough. It's so rare to have a person that has an angle on things, or has the perspective to think about something in a different way. Like myself as an essayist, I would say that I'm not a good writer. I'm an okay writer. I'm a competent writer. I can put words together in a way that makes sense. I would say that my strength is communicating my idea in such a way that it feels relatable. But if you want me to write some awesome prose, I'm probably not going to be very good at it. I'm not as good at constructing individual sentences as a lot of people, but at communicating one idea so that you know what I'm talking about, and so that you have something that you want to say about that. That's something that I can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think something to me, and please feel free to disagree, something to me that feels fairly broken in the ecosystem of games is, even if you are a good writer, if you do a lot of high-minded criticism or a lot of really interesting essays, to me, it doesn't feel like writers who do that sort of stuff, they don't seem particularly concerned with impact and whether it actually, the things they're writing about, whether they get addressed or not.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
feel
that way?
There's this shouting into the void thing where you sort of feel like, the industry should do this, and I'm going to tell you. But, who's going to listen to it, really? It depends on your audience and your vehicle for putting that out. Like the thing I wrote about publishers today, about half the people that replied to it are people that work at publishers. That's great. Like that's good, and that's a virtue of Gama Sutra being the website it is, and this article going on Gama Sutra.
Right.
Meanwhile, if I want to write a thing and I want to reach a lot of people, and I know that I've got some clever angle, I want to put it on Kotaku because I want people to see it. I want to generate just enough discussion that it gets passed around a little bit, and just knowing how all these audiences are different is pretty important. I kind of wanted to go back to something you said earlier.
Sure.
About journalists being, you didn't say they were lazy, but not being able to bring some of these stories to light in an interesting way. I really sympathize with the writers of today who have to deal with this huge deluge of games that are coming out. How do you find what's interesting and what's worth talking about? Someone like Rami Ismail, he can get people to talk about whatever he does because he has a consistent track record of working on interesting games and saying interesting things, and he likes to be out there, and he will comment on your article if you ask him, and this sort of thing. And that's a lot of developers want to get to that point, but in order to get there, you have to make things easier for the writers, because they are, as I said, deluged with all this stuff. They're getting 100 emails about a new Kickstarter launching every day or something. They can't possibly have the time to individually check each one of those and see if there's something interesting, if there's a cool angle there. When that's not their job to do to do just that for an entire day, which is what it would probably take. So there's some responsibility for the developers to kind of make that story. When I pitch a writer on writing something about me or our games, or letting me write something about our games for them, I usually pitch like 3 things. Like, here's the game we have. These are 3 things that I think are interesting to talk about with this game.
Yeah.
And I write about that from the perspective of myself as a reader, what would I find interesting, and myself as a writer, what would be most fun and easiest to write about? Like, how could I most quickly get a story out about this that's going to be interesting to everyone and fulfill everyone's needs as quickly as possible? And I know a lot of developers are just like, well, here's this game I've been working on for 2 years in secrecy, not actual secrecy, but like in obscurity. And everybody love it, please.
Sorry, that's a laugh of recognition.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm on this, I don't want to call anybody out, but I'm on this indie mega booth alumni list, and there are just so many folks on there who are like, okay, I'm releasing my game in 2 weeks. What do I need to know about marketing? And it's like, oh god, you're 2 weeks, man. Like, you had
everything.
you had a lot of time to try to figure out what to do with this, and 2 weeks is not the time to be like, okay, so I talk to press? I don't know. How do I do it? And so I understand both sides. The developers want people to talk about their game, but they just want to work on it, and they want people to recognize their pure genius. And I've definitely worked with a lot of people who are like, I don't want to promote myself, but people should know how great I am. And it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know how you're going to do that. And then on the writer side, you're pitched so many dang things. There's got to be some filtration process to be where you find an angle interesting. And so this is why I feel like I should pitch things straight. And
It's always, yeah. I mean, it's always hard because, we've been on the same side of the aisle, as it were. But I mean, I of course am friendly with people who make games, and it's always hard. I never really know what to tell people because I've clearly shifted in the direction of the type of stuff that I'm contributing with, this project. But I don't ever really know what to tell people who are trying to make their game and trying to get it noticed. People are told to pitch the human angle or pitch the story that you'd want to read, but I think that so many people fundamentally don't know how to talk about video games, and
yeah,
then there's an extra. It's compounded by self-consciousness of making yourself vulnerable and talking about why you like doing the thing that you're doing. So
well,
when
that's
people
totally
say,
it.
when people are told pitch the human side or pitch the story, what do you think they mean? Because a lot of the stories that are told in the echo chambers of video games, it makes sense that success stories and start following a familiar rhythm and pattern, but they also it's like any industry, when you hear success stories, you base your ambitions off of that, or you choose to ignore them, but you don't know what you're not hearing when you keep hearing those same things over and over. I've seen it discussed on Twitter from time to time, and something I try to look at here is okay, people want to hear the human side, but they don't really want to hear about, whether your spouse was supplementing your income, or whether you had to take on contract jobs, or, ways you were with a publisher before and they may have screwed you out of ever getting money. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's sort of like a two-pronged question. And just
Yeah,
when
well,
people say they want the human side of the story, what do they really mean?
I I try to talk about failure a fair amount myself.
Yeah.
Because every time I do it, people are like, "This is so refreshing to hear someone talk about a time that they messed up," and it's good. I don't, and I also understand why people don't do it, because it's at GDC I gave a talk called "How to Almost Bankrupt Your Game Company," and
yeah,
and this, I was like, "This is funny. This is going to be a good talk. I'm enjoying this," and then, a couple weeks before I'm actually giving the talk, I start to think, what if this is the first time that not what if, this is going to be the first time most people have heard of me and my game company, probably. And their first impression is now going to be one of failure. Is this, have I screwed myself? What if there's a publisher in the audience who is looking for a cool video game to fund, watches my talk, and is like, well, not these guys. And so I understand why people don't want to do it, but it is important, and I feel like I could get a job if I had to get a job. So I may as well be one of the people to talk about failure. I think a lot of people talk about failure after they've had success, after they feel comfortable that it's in their past. But, we've never had real success, unless you call success staying alive for 4 years, which we have done, and that's pretty good. But we're not buying any Teslas over here, or putting a down payment on a house. We're scraping by is what we're doing, and and so it's weirder to talk about failure in that case, but somebody's got to do it, so we'll do it too. But anyway, back to the human angle thing. I think that a lot of folks just don't know what's interesting about their game to the outside, because they haven't been showing it around a lot. They haven't talked to people that aren't their friends, or they just are too close to the project that they can't see what's interesting. And it's hard to get that almost objective outside view, but it's not entirely objective, because you have to care about the game a lot to find those things. So it's kind of both. I actually just had a conversation before I talked to you with a company who needs help figuring out how to market their game. Like what about their game should be put forth so that press or YouTubers or streamers are going to want to talk about it and look at it. And it's very hard for people to know that because they haven't been on both sides. They haven't been in the press. They haven't done these things. It's tough, and yeah, I don't know. It's people. So my friend Jay Tholen just put up a Kickstarter for Hyperspace Outlaw, which is a pretty cool video game, and he had all these for his Kickstarter thing. He had this great video that was totally in-world, in the voice. It's really like late 80s, well, not late 80s. It's like a 90s vaporwave GeoCities exploration game in which you're like a cyber hacker enforcer guy going around trying to find people doing misdeeds, and then you literally surf the cyber highways with your cruiser and smash into them and get viruses and get information and data and stuff. And it's a cool, well-conceived world, and the video was all in that voice, and the GIFs are all these pink and purple and gray awesome rotating 3D things, and it looks exactly like what it should look like. But then all of the text on the Kickstarter was, this is a game about this. Here's what you can do, and then this thing happens, and then we're making this, but it's not done yet. And he sent it to me like an hour before it was going to go live, and I was like, hold off, I'm going to rewrite all of your text. And I rewrote it to be a manual for a new cyber enforcer, but which was also a semi-rogue AI that was gaining sentience, and which was one of the themes of one of the things you might encounter in this space was rogue AI, and he was most of the way there with the voice, but you can feel like you need to privilege information, and you can be like, all right, I need to tell people about this feature, and I need people to know that this is the direction we're going, and so you'll just write it straight. But you still have to package it and present it in a way that it feels exciting, and it feels natural, and it feels like everything is part of that world. And from things like that through to pitching your game, it's something that is just it's not in everybody all the time. They know how to make and conceive of a world, but then they don't know how to share that world with everybody else. Not that Jay doesn't. It's just that in this particular instance, he hadn't done that yet.
Oh, it's people needing other people. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think people sort of get self-conscious
and
about
also,
that. Oh shit!
It's also quite possible he didn't need it. I just really wanted to do it. I just as soon as I read it, I was like, oh man, but what if it were this way? And so I just rewrote the whole thing. I was like, here it is. And he said, okay, fine. And then he put it in there. Yeah.
Well, so I just have a few more questions for you. I don't know. Is there something else specific you wanted to get into that we didn't get a chance to, or?
I don't know. It's hard to say what exact angle we're going down. For me, it's mostly about the relationship between journalism and development, which is interesting. If you wanted to talk about other things, that's cool too. But this is all fine for me. I don't have.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I guess just to dip back a little bit, we were talking about Japan and sort of the way that's rippled. I mean, so we talked about Dojin, but can you talk a little bit about sort of otaku culture and the ways that it is similar or dissimilar to, I guess, American geek culture.
Yeah. Otaku culture is strange to me because it has gotten... It used to be when I was going to Japan, interviewing people, and then, I would always start by asking the developer to tell me their background, like every game they've worked on. Mm-hmm. And they would do it, and sometimes I would stop them and be like, oh yeah, you worked on, I don't know, Valis 2 for the PC Engine. I love that game. And then they'll be like, oh, this guy's a maniac, or this guy's like a game otaku. And I used to take pride when they would say something like that. And then as time wore on, I was like, oh man, don't think about me that way. I just, I like stuff, but I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
The otaku stuff has these days become so intertwined with the moe culture and this sort of real kind of fetishization of young girls that it's weird. Like, you look at the PlayStation Vita market, it's pretty much all that now. It's about all it is sexualized 12-year-olds that are also a tank or are also a video game console. It's just which kind of sexualized 12-year-old are you into? And that's that's not something that I'm trying to engage with over here. And I don't think it used to be more like you're really into a thing and it's not a thing that everybody else is into, and that's kind of all right. But it's gotten way more focused in to niches within niches, and it winds up drilling down a little too much where people can just spiral into one hole, and then that's kind of where they're stuck. And there's some parallels to geek culture here, where you get people that are defenders of the fandom, and the fandom can be going in a different direction than the creator intended. Like, I saw Stranger Things. It was not revelatory for me in any way. It was just a show that was on the TV, and I watched it, and it was fine. It ended the way I figured, and it had some poor dialogue, but it had some interesting things, and I kind of wanted to see what was going to happen next, and so I watched it. But then later, there were all these, once it became like a big thing, there were all these think pieces about how this element is bad, or this part is inconsistent, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, did you watch the thing? It was that way all along. This is what it was. It wasn't some high art. This was like some kids who liked Stephen King a lot, who then wrote a story that is their own version of that, and they said it in the 80s because that's when they grew up and they liked it, and that's there it is. But then you've got these people that are like, this character wouldn't actually do this because it's like, how can you say that? Why are you now the person who decides what Superman would and wouldn't do? It's not yours. You're not the guardian of it. You can't say that Captain Marvel would never be a woman and a Muslim or whatever. You can say it, but it's not for you to say.
Right. I mean, go ahead.
Just and the kind of parallel with the Japanese otaku culture is there's that kind of stuff where it's as though the characters are real people and they are down this one trajectory and they can't change and they can't do something else because that's what you've known and that's what you've loved and that's how it has to stay, or else it's sacrilege and blasphemy, and that's it's harmful to creativity to think about things in that way.
Did otaku culture, did it have, like, there's this sort of need for a consensus is something I see a lot of in, I guess, geek culture today.
Oh, right. All
Was it
right-thinking people think about it this way.
yes.
That I don't know because I'm not as much of a, like, 2chan reader and viewer, but I think that it's easier to get that consensus in otaku culture because as opposed to superhero comics of today or movies, I feel like anime and to a lesser extent manga is written for those people directly because they know they can get money out of them, and so they are working hard to maintain that consistency. Whereas Western geeky things they're trying to branch out, they're trying new things, they're trying to go in different directions more, and so that consistency and that consensus is going to be less achievable because they're actually, at least a bit more, in my opinion, trying to do different stuff. Now, in manga, I definitely think there are people trying a lot of things, but then once something sticks, it's like if this doesn't turn into a battle manga at some point, I'm going to be very upset because it seems like it's going that direction. I don't know. It's a thing.
Well, so I'll have this be my my last question for you, and if you've read these before, you know what typically the last question is. What do you think video games have accomplished?
Yeah, I wish I had thought about this earlier.
I often wonder about that with people who read this, who then I talk to, like, are they planning an answer for that question at the end?
I think it's better if you don't plan anyway. Wait, is it? I don't know. I wouldn't claim to be any authority on what video games have done or haven't done. I think they've successfully integrated into culture. That's one thing. Not so successfully that you can watch a movie today where people are playing a video game and have it actually sound like a video game. It'll sound like Atari 2600 bloops and bleeps, no matter what, no matter who made it, unfortunately. But otherwise, games are a real thing. They're part of culture, and people who never called themselves gamers before are playing games on their phones all the time, and that's a pretty big achievement, I would say. Another thing that this isn't so much something that video games themselves have done, but the industry, for all of the problems that we have surrounding representation of race and gender and gender identities and sexualities and all of these things, like, believe it or not, these terrible conversations we're having are well advanced of most other industries. My girlfriend is telling me when she hears about the problems that we're having in the industry and the crises and the fires that come up every so often, she's just like, she works in fashion, and she says in her industry we wouldn't even be talking about how and why Allison Rapp got fired from Nintendo, or whatever the fashion equivalent would be. Like, it wouldn't. No, first of all, nobody would know. Second of all, the kind of patriarchal majority view would hold, and we have discussions about representation on panels in the video game industry. There should be a woman there. There should be a person of color there. And meanwhile, it doesn't happen all the time, but we talk about it. Meanwhile, in the library industry, where 83% of the librarians are women, 100% of the keynotes to this library festival are men. And we have a lot more difficult conversations to have in the future, and we need to move forward much further from where we are. But we're doing way better than a lot of other people, and I think it's kind of good to remember that as frustrated as we can all get with things not moving fast enough, we're moving faster than tech in general with these conversations. We have better conversations in the media about these kinds of representation issues than even in Silicon Valley tech stuff. And that's it's good to know that for all our failings and for all the things we need to do better, that we're still doing something. So that's good. And in terms of video games themselves, I think the level of conversation inside of video games has not particularly risen that much. Story hasn't gotten that much better or that much more complicated than it was in a 90s JRPG. But but it's not necessarily
again a laugh of recognition.
Yeah, but it's I look at that as an opportunity more than as a problem. Like, it's nice to think that as a person coming into the game industry, as a new person who might just be starting to make their first games now, that it hasn't all been done before. There's still avenues to explore and things that you can say that haven't been said in this medium. I studied film in school, and I didn't enjoy making movies, and I also felt as though so many of the things that I wanted to communicate or talk about had already been said better. So what did I have to say here? But then when it came to games, it's like we've said so little so far that there's a huge amount of opportunity. And not that I'm doing it right now. I'm not making any amazing statements with my game about running deer over with your station wagon. But the opportunity is there. It's very appealing and kind of keeps me wanting to be here.